What's up, everyone? Welcome back to part 3 of the How to Build Your Own DFS Model video series. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how to bring some new data into your model in a couple of different ways. And then I'll talk about how to make your first adjustment to our baseline value of projected player points. But first, we're going to format this data in a table again, just like we did in the last video. So you're going to go ahead and highlight the top, Control Shift down, so we have all of our data highlighted. I'm going to go Insert, Table, hit OK, make sure this is still checked. And then you can play around with the table style up here, but first make sure you rename your table. So I'm going to name it Projected Points, and then I'm going to change it to, I guess, like this blue. And then the other thing I have to do also is get rid of my gray background color. And you can see my table looks like that. You can also get rid of the filters if you like. Coming over here to filter, removing those. But now we just have our data formatted a bit more nicely, and when we make calculations, we won't have to drag them all the way down to the bottom of the table like we have been. The other thing we can do quickly is just hide a couple of the columns that we don't need anymore. So, for example, player name. This isn't the column that we're going to be using. So you can go ahead and hit hide. And then also, let's hide player minutes and fantasy points per game. So we'll have our standardized name, our points per minute, projected minutes, and our baseline projection for points. And from there, we'll go on to getting some new data into our model. So I'm going to show you guys two ways to get new data into your model. I'll go with the easier way first. And what you're going to do is you're going to create a new sheet. We'll call this data sheet 1. And the reason I say this is the easy way is because all you're going to do for this is take the data directly from our DFS analytics newsletter. So this is actually from our February 13th edition, or that's the players I'm working with. So I'm going to come into it. I'm going to actually just go ahead and download our data sheet from that day. You can see it took me to the lineup optimizer, so I'm going to come into our data sheet, and all I'm going to do is just copy all of this data here. So I went Control Shift left arrow, Shift down, because all I really care about, I don't care about the tables or the new projected points, and then Control Shift down. And I'm going to go ahead and copy, come back over here, and paste. And you can see now I have data for just about every statistic I would ever need in a player model. Of course, there are some more which we'll get into, but in terms of making adjustments to player points, this is really going to have you covered for a lot of different adjustments you would look to make on any given night. So this is definitely going to be the easier way to make an adjustment, and the first adjustment we're going to be making is usage out. So we have that right, let me see where I can find that. Yeah, we have that right here. So what usage out is let's say we're thinking about the Houston Rockets, right? And there's two different games, and in one game, PJ Tucker's out, and in another game, Victor Oladipo's out. Well, those are two guys who play a very similar amount of minutes, but Victor Oladipo takes up a lot more usage, and he takes a lot more shots than PJ Tucker does. So if Oladipo is out, it's likely that we're going to want to give a bigger boost to other players on the Rockets than if PJ Tucker's out. So the way we can do that is we can look at the total usage that's out from players on a certain team. And I also like to add some restrictions in here, which is that the player whose usage we're summing plays a minimum of 15 minutes per game. Because if there's a guy who plays 5 minutes per game and has pretty high usage when he's in, I don't necessarily want to sum his usage into the team usage out, because if he's only playing 5 minutes per game, I don't really care that he's out. And then also that they've played at least one game in the last 15 days. And I like doing that too because If a guy's already been out for 15 days, it's very likely that the prices have adjusted. It's very likely that the team has adjusted, and I don't necessarily want to continue giving this player a boost even though the guy's been out for such a long time. So the easy way would just be to use our XLOOKUP function to pull the team usage out exactly from here. So what we would do is we would go team usage out 1. And you can see what's really nice about tables is when I add that in, it's all just going to become a part of our table. And we'll go XLOOKUP Steph Curry into datasheet 1, drag this down to 400, and then grab team usage out also to row 400. So take a look at that. Hopefully that makes sense how we did that. And I'm going to hit enter. And you can see that for a number of guys, we have team usage out values. And you can see here that I actually forgot to lock my cell references. So that's a good example of why you need to do it. Because what happened is when I pasted down, or when the formula pasted down, the array that it was pasting with moved down, so it excluded James Harden. And it went ahead and excluded Julius Randle and a bunch of guys. So now you can see when I lock my cell references, everyone's team usage out should paste in nicely. And you can adjust the decimals if you want less. You would have to go Control-Shift down, Control-D. But there you go. Now we have nicely our team usage down pasted into the sheet. And this NA is because, again, I didn't fully clean the names in the first video, or in the naming standard video. So if you haven't watched that, be sure to go and give that a look so you don't run into that issue. But now we're going to go through the hard way to get team usage out. And we're going to do this by importing data from Basketball Reference. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up a new sheet. We'll call it Advanced Player Statistics. And then we're going to use a nice function in Excel that will allow you to automatically import the data just by clicking one simple button. And what we can do here is we'll go to our Basketball Reference. And you can see I already came to the Advanced Stats sheet. And what we're going to want is we're going to want this table to come into our Excel workbook. I'll go ahead and sort for usage. I'm going to uncheck this because sometimes you run into some errors with that. But I'm going to copy the URL, come back to our projected points, and then I'm going to go Data, Get Data, and then From Web. Now I'm going to paste my URL here. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to give it a second to load. And you can see that it actually went ahead and it found my data table in that web page, which is going to be really nice because, again, I'm going to be able to update this data whenever the data on Basketball Reference updates just by clicking a button in Excel, which I'll show you in a second. Go ahead and click Transform Data. And then I usually don't play with any of these. You can delete certain columns if you want, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit Close and Load. And you can see now our data is in a table for us, and it's been imported into our workbook. So the way we would update this table, we wouldn't have to go back into Basketball Reference, but all we would need to do is click Data, Refresh All, and Refresh All. And you can see it's running a background query right here. And if any of this data had changed on Basketball Reference, it would have automatically changed for us here. So obviously this isn't going to have the team usage out stat. But what it is going to have is player usage, which can be really nice for us because what we can do now is we have player usage, and from our today's lineup sheet, we also have an injury indicator for each player. So we can go ahead and we can look for if a player's out, give us their usage, and then we're going to use a function called SumIfs to sum a player's usage for all the cases where they're on the same team as that player. Hopefully that was not too confusing, but I'll go ahead and start setting this up to give an example of it. First thing we're going to do is player team. Second thing we're going to need is player usage. So let's get those two first using XLOOKUP. And grab team right from today's lineup. Go down to 400. Grab team, 400. Enter. And then remember, I need to lock cell references again. And this is another good example of a time where I think I made this mistake twice actually. So hopefully you guys caught me the first time. But when I'm looking in my today's lineup, or actually I didn't make it on the data sheet because we do use standardized names. But when I was looking into today's lineup, I used player names from D1 as opposed to the standardized names. So I'm going to have to go back and I'm going to have to fix that. And I'm going to want to look through, my lookup array is going to be my standardized names, right? Down to row 400. And then team, down to 400. Enter. And lock those cell references with F4. There we go. Player usage equals XLOOKUP. But before I do this, I'm going to have to add a standardized name column to our advanced player statistics, or our advanced table. So here, I'm going to go ahead and write standardized names equals XLOOKUP player name. In our naming standard, our input names, 400, or let's go. We can actually remember we can use the name of our table here, which is really nice. So I can go naming standard, bracket, input names, bracket, comma, naming standard, bracket, standardized names. And that should fill out nicely. Now come back here, and to get usage, I'm just going to go XLOOKUP. And I actually think I could just use this table as well if I wanted. So I have to figure out what the name of this table is. It's probably like table. It's called advanced table. And then bracket, standardized names, comma, advanced table, bracket. What we want to return is the usage percentage. So we'll go usage percentage. And we have all of our players' usage imported into our original sheet. So now what we're going to do is we want to get the player's injury status. And to do this, I'm going to type this in the top. To do this, again, we're just going to use a nice simple XLOOKUP function. And whoops, that's not how you write it. We're going to grab player name. I'm going to go to today's lineup, look through our standardized names, 400, and then we're going to get our injury indicator, right? And you can see I didn't lock my cell references, which I keep forgetting to do, but luckily you can do it after the fact. And it's a bit confusing with the difference between a 0 and an O. but we can easily write an if function that can tell the difference between those two. And now we're going to get our usage missing for each player. So all this is going to tell me, or all I want this column to tell me, is if the player's out, return their usage. If they're not out, return 0. So how much usage is missing from them being out? And obviously if they're not out, there's no usage missing. So we're going to write an if function. And the if function is going to say if the injury status is equal to, and you have to use some quotes around whenever you're typing in letters in Excel, it's called a string, so you have to use quotes around it so it understands that it's a string. But you're going to write in if injury status equals O, return the player's usage, so value if true is usage, otherwise return 0. And then we're going to hit enter. And you can see that for the players who are out tonight, so Christian Wood, Victor Oladipo, DeAndre Hunter, we keep going down the list. Their usage has been returned in the usage missing column. And if you wanted to use the same restrictions I had, so if you wanted to use a restriction of, and I'll come over here to show you, if you guys wanted to use a restriction of 15 minutes per game or one game played in the last 15, you could go ahead and add another column here. And we could call that column minutes, and you could look at how many minutes that player has been averaging. We could get that again from our historical player data, or I believe we could also get that from our advanced table under minutes played right here. And we could say if minutes played exceeds 15, return the usage missing, but otherwise return 0. So we basically zero out any player who doesn't meet our minutes requirement. And then our last column is going to be usage out. And this is a column where we're going to just sum the usage out from the players who are on the same team as the player who we're looking at. So this is going to be a sum ifs statement. And you can see that it's going to, oh, whoops, I didn't write it equals. You can see it's going to ask us for 3 things right off the bat, which is sum range. So what values are we summing? Well, we actually have a table here, which is nice. But our table is called projected points. And then we're going to sum the usage missing column. Our criteria range 1 is going to be the projected, our criteria range 1 is going to be team. So again, we're going to go projected points. And we're going to go team. And then our criteria 1 is going to be just the player's team. So basically what this is saying is look through everyone's team, and if the player's team is the same as the team with the usage out, we're going to add that to the sum. So if this value was Golden State right here, then we would add 26.2 to this sum. And hopefully that makes sense. But all we're going to do now is we're going to close it and hit enter. And you can see our values for usage out in the table. And you might be wondering, well, why is Steph Curry's usage out so high when on our data sheet we had Curry's usage out at only 10. And this is because of the restrictions that we impose on it. So really it's up to you if you think those restrictions are important. And I'll go ahead and give the examples here, where it's the reason Curry's usage out is going to be so high is because James Wiseman's has 25 points of usage out. Marquise Chris has 27 points of usage out. And Kayvon Looney has 10 points of usage out. So when you sum those 3 up, that's going to get you to 63.6. And the reason I think that our method is kind of better than that is because Wiseman's been out for a really long time. And as such, I don't necessarily think his usage should continue to be taken into account. The Warriors will have adjusted at this point. The prices will have adjusted. And the fact that he's out isn't really as important at this point. Marquise Chris, I believe he's been out forever as well. And I also think that he's not a guy who plays a ton of minutes. So when he gets in, he clearly consumes the ball a lot, but he doesn't get in a lot. So why would we be giving Curry a boost in the case where Chris isn't, when in the case where Chris is out, if he doesn't play many minutes? And then Looney, I think, was a more recent injury, so it might have made more sense to add that to it. But you just kind of have to use your own basketball knowledge in this case, and your own intuition to make a decision on how you want that restriction to look. Do you want it to be restricted by the number of minutes a guy plays? Do you want it to be restricted by how much usage a player consumes? Do you want it to be restricted by how recently the player has been ruled out? These are all things you can consider and should look into if you are creating your own model. But now that we have our usage out values, we can make our first adjustment to projected points. So I'm going to call this adjustment 1, or actually what I'll call this is usage out adjustment. This is going to be very simple, and if you have a model that you're able to backtest, which will probably be one of my final videos because it's a more advanced concept, you're able to tweak these adjustments and see how they reflect the total error of your projections and the real scores. And then also you can look at things like how accurate are the strong projections your model is making. So what I mean by a strong projection is if we're projecting a guy for 3 points more than his salary expected score, or 3 points less than his salary expected score, how often is that projection accurate? And by playing around with the different adjustments, we can actually see those values be reflected immediately. And that's why backtesting can be so powerful. But if you don't have a backtesting model set up, which obviously not many of us do, you're just going to go ahead and divide the team usage out. I'm going to use ours by 25. And you can see now we have a adjustment to our value or our baseline value of projected points that we can go ahead and apply to all of our players. So what we would do here next is we would go final value for projected points equals baseline projection plus usage out adjustment. Right, and now we've made our first adjustment. Usage out adjustment is a adjustment that I can tell you from backtesting has some predictive power, especially on those strong predictions. So there's a lot of cases where significant usage out for a player leads to a really strong performance. And that's kind of why I'm showing you it as one of the first ones. It's one of the more predictive adjustments you can make. There are some other ones I can talk about in future videos. But what I would suggest for you now is you can definitely use the advanced table that we brought in to make some more adjustments. Let's say you think that offensive rebound percentage is really important, or defensive box plus minus. Maybe you think a guy going up against someone who's a great defender is important. You can use this to make some adjustments, but I really think that, and I'm not just trying to convince you to go to our newsletter, I really think that a lot of the stuff in here is really valuable to making adjustments to projected points. For example, the line, the over-under, if a game is projected to be very high scoring, that's a case where you would probably want to give a player a positive adjustment. Usage out, obviously, positional minutes missing. So this is if a player on the same team who plays the same position is out, these are the minutes that would be accounted for there. So for example, DeMarcus Cousins and Christian Wood. If Wood's out, then Cousins would get a boost in this column. And if Cousins out, then Woods would get a boost in this column. Teams on a back-to-back. It's kind of a known fact at this point that teams perform a bit worse on a back-to-back. So that can be something to look at, especially for starters. Player usage, just the normal player usage, that can be important. Salary adjusted DVP, this is obviously a hugely important metric. So this is how good is the team they're playing against. So how good is Golden State if we're looking at James Harden, at defending the point guard position. And you can see Golden State ranks 12th in the league, so that's above average. Whereas Golden State ranks 29th in the league at defending the power forward position. So for KD, he could be in a plus matchup from that. And then obviously, I personally think that the value from player profile is probably the most powerful metric we have here. From backtesting, it's the metric with by far the most predictive power that we've created. And this is when you're going to look at players who score in the same way as James Harden and accrue their fantasy points in the same way as James Harden. How have they done in the past against Golden State? And you can see that it's pretty terrible. That's actually one of the higher values I've seen. But a guy who's in like a really good matchup could be Draymond, where Brooklyn. I mean, we all know Brooklyn's been pretty poor defensively this year, but to players with Draymond's same player profile. So I'm guessing Draymond has a player profile, something along the lines of paint scorer and all-around point contributor because he gets a lot of assists and rebounds. To players who kind of contribute their points in the same way, Brooklyn has been pretty terrible. So this is a nice metric to look at, and I would definitely recommend trying to incorporate that into your model if you can. Opponent rank pace, obviously an important metric. Teams that play at a faster pace are ones that you're going to be more likely to score more points against, simple as that. And then 3-pointers allowed, defensive rebounds allowed, offensive rebounds, assists, turnovers forced, and points allowed are all things you can look to incorporate if you think they're important. So that will wrap up this video. In the next video, depending on kind of some of the feedback I get, I will either talk about making a few more adjustments to kind of arrive at a final value for projected points, or I'm going to talk about how to start setting up your optimizer and eventually how we're going to optimize our final lineups. So thanks, and I'll see you guys in the next one.